Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind carried dust and judgment through the streets of Dry Creek, and Odessa Vaughn stood barefoot in the dirt, the sheriff's brand still burning red on her wrist. She had stolen a loaf of bread. One loaf. And now she was a thief in the eyes of everyone in town. "Shoulda let her starve," someone muttered behind her. Odessa's chin lifted. She would not cry here, not in front of these people. She clutched her arms to her thin frame, the afternoon sun beating down on her back. Her dress was worn through at the shoulders, and one of her boots had come apart at the seam, but she still stood tall. Or as tall as a woman could after being dragged from the alley and marked like cattle. The baker, a squat man with a bristly neck and a voice like gravel, crossed his arms. "Debt's $5. Either she pays or the mark stays permanent." "I had no choice," Odessa said, her voice quiet but steady. "I was hungry." "No one's ever got a choice," he scoffed. That was when the horseshoes hit the dirt. Slow, even steps. Not the clatter of town folk or the stomping of lawmen. No, this was something steadier. The crowd shifted. Heads turned. A man dismounted from a black horse, tall and broad-shouldered. Dust clung to the hem of his coat, and his hat sat low over his brow, shadowing his face. He moved like he had seen war and survived it. Calm, intent, he stepped between her and the crowd like he had always belonged there. "How much?" he asked the baker without looking at him. $5, the baker said, puffing up. "Unless you're here to buy more trouble." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a thick leather pouch. He counted out the coins slowly, loud enough that the crowd could hear every clink as they hit his palm. "Here's 10, 5 for the bread. 5 for your bad manners." The baker hesitated, then snatched the money. "Fine, she's paid." The sheriff, leaning against the post nearby, narrowed his eyes. "That does not take away the brand." The cowboy turned his head toward him. "No. But it says she is no longer yours to humiliate." He turned back to Odessa. His eyes were sharp, green like pine needles, and they landed on her with a kind of quiet understanding that made her throat catch. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you off the street." She did not move at first. Did not believe this was real. But then he held out a hand, large, calloused, warm from the sun. "Why?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. He did not smile, just looked at her like she mattered. "Because you were hungry, and no one should be punished for surviving." She took his hand. They walked through town together, and though the crowd watched, no one spoke. Maybe it was the way the man carried himself. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was not a criminal but a person. When they reached the edge of town, he helped her onto his horse without a word. She sat sideways, her knees brushing his when he climbed up behind her. He guided the horse west, away from the judging eyes and the heat of the sun. They rode for over an hour before he stopped beneath a cluster of cottonwoods near a creek. It was quiet there, the air cooler, water trickling soft over stone. He helped her down, then tied the horse and offered her a canteen. She drank slowly, both hands shaking. "You got a name?" he asked. "Odessa Vaughn," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. He nodded once. "Name's Vance Tiller." She looked at him, really looked. His face was lined, not with age but with wear. Maybe 30, maybe a little more. He had a scar that ran from his jaw to just under his ear, and his hair curled a little at the ends where it met the collar of his coat. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. "I have been where you are," he said simply. They sat in silence a while, the sound of the creek filling the space between them. Odessa pulled her knees to her chest and stared at the water. "You live near here?" she asked finally. "About 5 miles east. Got a small place, just me and the horse." She nodded, chewing her lip. "You got anyone?" he asked. She shook her head. "My father died last winter. Ma passed when I was 10. I came west looking for work, but Towns like Dry Creek do not hire women without husbands. I had nothing left. He looked at her steady. You do now, she blinked. What do you mean? I do not offer things I cannot give, he said. I will take you in, not out of pity, because you deserve better than that town gave you. She could not speak. Her throat was too tight. He stood and offered a hand again. Come on, it is getting late. They rode the rest of the way to his place in silence. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the land in gold and deep blue. His cabin was small but solid pinewood walls, a stone chimney, and a front porch with 2 chairs. He helped her down and led her inside. It was clean, warm. There was a fire already going, and the scent of beans and salt pork hung in the air. You can sleep in the bed, he said. I will take the chair. She hesitated. You do not have to, I know. That night, Odessa lay beneath a quilt that smelled of cedar, listening to the fire crackle. Vance sat in the chair by the hearth, arms crossed, eyes closed. She watched him for a long time, her heart aching with something she had not felt in years, safety. When the morning came, he was still there. And in the quiet space between dawn and full light, she realized he had not saved her out of duty. He had seen her, and somehow she had seen him too. By the second morning, Odessa had washed her hair with rainwater collected in a barrel behind the cabin. She'd found a comb in the washstand drawer and worked it slowly through the knots, wincing now and then but not stopping. The mirror above the basin was cracked down the center, but it showed enough for her to see the change in her face, less hollow, less guarded. She didn't recognize it yet, but it didn't unsettle her. Not this time. She stepped outside, where Vance was splitting kindling at the edge of the clearing, each strike of the axe clean and unhurried. His coat hung from a hook on the porch post, and his sleeves were rolled up past the elbow. She hadn't seen the markings on his forearms before, small, pale scars that told of rope burns, knife nicks, and hard-earned survival. You always work before breakfast, she asked, brushing damp strands off her neck. He didn't stop chopping. Only when someone else is sleeping in my bed, she raised a brow. I didn't mean it like that, he added, setting the axe aside. I meant, he paused, then shrugged. It's yours now if you want it. I didn't say I was staying. No, he said. You didn't. The quiet between them wasn't sharp. It moved like a river under thaw, careful but alive. She sat on the porch step and watched the steam rise from the cast iron kettle hanging on the hook over the fire pit. He poured water into 2 tin cups, added a spoonful of coffee grounds to each, and handed her one. Thank you, she said, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. You always live this far from town. I've always lived where folks don't talk too much. She sipped and winced. God, that's bitter. He didn't apologize. It's honest. She gave a soft snort and took another sip anyway. The trees beyond the clearing were just beginning to leaf out, soft green buds catching the morning light. The wind moved through them without hurry. Odessa pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I should go back, she said finally. Find work. Figure something out. There's a widow near the Red Hills. Keeps a herd and 2 boys, needs help mending fence and keeping house. Pays in coin, not just kindness. You think she'd take me? You show up like you did yesterday, no. You show up clean, fed, and standing straight, she might. Odessa looked down at her hands. The brand on her wrist hadn't faded. It would likely never fade. She'll see this. She might, he said, but her husband died 3 years back from a banker's bullet. She knows what it means to be judged by folks who never lived your life. Odessa's fingers closed over the mark. I'd still owe you for the bread for this. You don't. I feel like I do. He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. Then stay a few days, help with the garden. It's too early for planting, but the ground's soft enough to turn. And after, you decide then. She nodded, her eyes still on the trees. You fought, didn't you? War, his jaw tightened. Virginia. Wilderness and Cold Harbor. How old were you? 19 when they handed me the rifle. 22 when I put it down. She didn't ask more. He'd told her enough. Later, while he worked on the fence that marked the edge of the grazing field, Odessa found a rusted spade and started digging the garden rows. The soil was rocky in places, stubborn. Her palms blistered before midday, but she didn't stop. Vance passed by once, carrying a new rail on his shoulder. You don't have to do all that in one day. I know, she said, not lifting her eyes. By dusk, her arms ached and her back was stiff, but the rows were clean and straight. She stood at the edge of the tilled ground, sweat drying on her neck, and felt something close to pride. Inside, after supper, Vance poured hot water into a basin and set it on the washstand. You'll blister worse if you don't clean the dirt out, he said, nodding toward her hands. She dipped them into the water and winced. He pulled a tin from a shelf and opened it, the scent of pine and beeswax rising. Made it last fall. Elk tallow and spruce gum. Works better than most. She held her hands out, palms up. He took one gently between his fingers. His touch was steady but not practiced, like he remembered how to care for someone but hadn't done it in a long time. You don't talk much when you work, she said. I don't say things I don't mean. You ever been married? No. Why not? I don't lie easy. And I don't look away when things get hard. That's not the kind of man most women want. She watched him smooth salve over the worst of the blisters. That's exactly the kind of man I'd want. He looked up then, and something shifted between them, a stillness that didn't feel empty. You shouldn't say things unless you mean them either, he said. I don't lie easy either. He didn't answer. He just wrapped her hand in a strip of clean cloth and set the rest of the salve beside the basin. They didn't speak again that night. But when she lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling beams, she knew she wouldn't be leaving in the morning. Not yet. The wind came in colder that week, brushing the hills with early frost, though the calendar hadn't yet turned to November. Vance fixed a layer of canvas over the window frame and added pine knots to the woodpile, while Odessa mended a pair of his wool socks with careful stitches. She didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask her to leave. The hours shaped themselves around shared work and quiet meals, and for the first time in months, her body didn't ache from hunger. On the fourth morning, Vance hitched the mare to the small cart out back. Where are you headed? Odessa asked, tying her hair back with a strip of flannel she'd found in a drawer, trading post. Need seed for spring, salt, and a new whetstone. You should come. She hesitated at the threshold. Folks out there might know what I did. They might, he said, adjusting the bridle, but they'll know you're not alone. The post sat along a bend in the North Platte, a 2-hour ride west through Cottonwood Flats and open scrub. Odessa kept her hood up, eyes on the road, until she saw the roofline through bare branches. The building was wide and low, with a covered porch where crates of dried apples and folded canvas waited beside a stack of flour sacks. Inside, the walls were lined with barrels, copper kettles, and shelves of folded calico. The man behind the counter had a long beard and a voice like smoke. Been a while, Tiller, he said, weighing a sack of oats. Still living out near Deer Hollow, still, Vance replied, placing a tin of lamp oil on the counter. The trader's eyes shifted to Odessa. You're not alone today. Odessa, Vance said. She's working the land with me. She felt the pause that followed but didn't flinch from it. She met the trader's gaze and held it steady. He nodded once. There's a bolt of wool back there, charcoal gray. Would make a fair winter dress if she's staying through snow. They left with the cart half full salt, seed, a new iron kettle, and the wool cloth wrapped in paper. On the ride back, Odessa traced the weave of the fabric through the wrapping. "You didn't have to buy this," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "But you'll need it come December." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his profile that hadn't been there before. Not softness. Not exactly. But a kind of steadiness that went deeper than silence. Later that night, while she hemmed the wool into a garment shaped to her size, Vance worked by lamplight at the table, fitting a new handle onto the drawknife. His hands moved with quiet precision, the blade edge catching the glow. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" she asked, guiding the needle through the thick cloth. "No," he said. "The land's hard, but it's honest. I've never had reason to leave." "Would you if you did?" He laid the tool down and met her eyes. "Only if I had something worth following." The fire crackled low. She folded the half-finished dress in her lap. "I used to think I'd end up in a city," she said. "Denver, maybe, teaching. Walking to work in leather boots and clean gloves. You still could." "I don't want to anymore." He didn't answer, but his attention didn't drift. It stayed fixed on her, like he was listening for something beneath her words. She stood and crossed the room, placing the folded wool on the shelf. When she turned back, he was still watching. "I'm not the same woman who stepped into Dry Creek," she said. "I wouldn't survive it now, not because I'm weaker, because I won't shrink again." "You don't have to," he said. "Not here." She moved closer slowly, not to test him, but because something in her chest had settled. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the rough edge of his jaw. "I don't want to go," she said. "Not tomorrow, not next week." "Then don't," he said. He didn't touch her, not yet. But she saw it, the shift in his breath, the way his shoulders eased. Like something long held inside him had finally found its answer. Outside, the trees creaked in the cold, branches tapping the roof in time with the wind. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the scent of pine smoke and wool and something unspoken, waiting. She stepped back, not to retreat, but to give them space to breathe. "Good night, Vance." "Good night, Odessa." And for the first time in either of their lives, the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was promise. The snow came early that year, drifting quiet and sure across the hills, softening the edges of fence posts and tree roots. Vance laid cedar boughs along the porch edge to keep the wind from curling under the door. Odessa stitched a lining into her winter dress by lamplight, her needle moving with steady rhythm even as the wind howled against the shutters. They rose before first light now, tending to chores with breath fogging in the morning air. The mare's coat thickened with the cold, and the hens laid fewer eggs, but the cabin stayed warm, the fire never letting the chills settle long. One evening near the end of November, Vance returned from checking the trap line with a bundle of rabbits slung over his shoulder and a strange look in his eye. "Ran into someone," he said, setting the game on the chopping block. "Hill north of the creek." Odessa paused where she stood near the stove, hands dusted in flour. "Trouble?" "Not sure yet. He said he's new to the valley, calls himself Harlan Finch, claims he's buying land east of the ridge." She brushed flour from her hands and crossed to the window. "Folks don't settle that far up unless they've been run out of somewhere else." Vance nodded once. His boots were too clean, and his horse was branded from a ranch in Kansas. Didn't smell like someone looking to homestead. She turned from the window. "Did he ask about us?" "Only asked who kept this stretch of land." "I didn't answer." Odessa picked up the kettle and poured water over the tin of dried beans soaking near the hearth. "If he comes closer, we'll know by his eyes." That night, they sat at the table without speaking much. The only sound was the soft scrape of Vance's knife across the whetstone, the fire popping in the hearth, and the distant call of an owl in the woods. Odessa reached for a quilt she'd folded earlier, laying it across the bench beside her. "I've been thinking about the garden." We could run a second row next spring, maybe plant squash along the back edge. If we dry it right, it'll keep through the lean months." Vance watched the blade in his hand, then set it aside. "That sounds good." She hesitated. "I want to add more hens, 3 more, maybe 4. We've enough feed and I can build a second nesting box." He leaned back in his chair, arms resting on the table. "You're planning like you mean to stay." "I am." She stood, brushing her skirt smooth with her palms, then crossed to where he sat. Her fingers found the edge of the table, warm from the lamp overhead. "I don't want this to be something I borrow," she said. "Not the land, not the days." Vance didn't move, but his voice dropped low. "You're not a guest here, Odessa. You haven't been for weeks." "I need to hear it plain," she said. "Not out of kindness, not because I was hungry once." He looked up at her then, and for a long moment the space between them held steady. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I want what we've built. I want more mornings with you in them." Her shoulders softened and she exhaled slow. "Then I'm yours, not borrowed, not passing through." He stood, his hands finding hers without rush or hesitation. No trembling, no doubt. Outside, snow fell heavy and sure, blanketing the fields in silence. But inside the cabin, there was warmth that didn't come from fire. There was a tether between them now, pulled taut not by need but by choice. When he leaned down, his forehead rested against hers before anything else. It was not a kiss full of urgency, but of knowing, of home. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The ground stayed frozen through December, and the river near the edge of the property stiffened to ice thick enough to hold a man's weight. Vance laid traps farther along the bank, bringing in pelts to trade once the roads opened. Odessa kept a ledger now, pencil sharp and lines neat, marking what they had, what they'd need come spring. The days found their rhythm between them, quiet, useful, steady. One morning, while sweeping out the corners of the cabin, she caught sight of a pine box tucked beneath the cot he never used. She hesitated only a moment before kneeling to pull it out. Inside were letters, some yellowed, some folded so many times the creases had begun to wear through. Most were unopened. One bore the seal of the War Department. She didn't open that one either. When Vance came in from splitting wood, his boots tracked snow across the threshold. He saw the box at her feet and stopped short, not angry, just still. "I wasn't looking for secrets," she said. "I know." She sat back on her heels. "You keep them close, though." "I used to open them." "I don't anymore." She reached for his glove, tugged it gently from his hand. "You never told me you had people who wrote." "My mother once. A cousin in Tennessee. One letter came from an officer I served under. He was the only one who called me by my first name." She waited. "I buried too many boys to want their names in ink," he said. "After the war, I stopped answering. Figured I'd said all I had." She placed the glove on the table. "You've been saying plenty lately." He gave a quiet exhale that wasn't quite laughter. "I've been learning how." That night, as snow fell soft against the window panes, she unfolded a piece of calico and began piecing together a quilt from old scraps, his worn shirts, a bit of muslin that had lined her travel bag when she'd first come west. She stitched late, her fingers stiff but sure. Vance watched from the rocker, a book resting closed in his hands. "You always good with your hands." "I used to sew for a pastor's daughter in Missouri," she said. "She'd pay me in jam and second-hand books. I learned to make do." He leaned forward. "You ever miss it?" "No," she said, tying off a thread. "That life never fit me." By January, the widow near the Red Hills rode out with one of her boys to trade eggs for lye soap. Odessa poured coffee for them both and sent them off with a satchel of dried herbs. The boy, hardly out of childhood, stared at the rifle hanging over the hearth and asked if Vance had ever shot a man. "Yes," Vance said, not unkindly. The boy nodded, satisfied. "Just checking." After they rode off, Odessa returned to the stove. "You didn't flinch. No reason to. You speak softer now," she said. "Even when you say hard things." He looked at her then, the morning light brushing his jaw. "So do you." The calendar turned again. February came with longer light and the first signs of thaw. Odessa stood on the porch one morning, rubbing warmth into her arms, watching a pair of crows pick at the field's edge. "I've been thinking on something," she said when Vance came up behind her. He waited. "I don't want to just live beside you." She turned to face him. "I want to be your wife, Vance." His face didn't change much, but she saw it something steady shifting into place. "I was waiting for the right moment to ask," he said, "but I think this is better." He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a ring, plain brass, shaped rough but even. "I made it from a cartridge casing," he said. "Didn't know if you'd want something finer." She slipped it on her finger. "There's nothing finer than a thing made honest." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who passed through twice a season. He stood in his muddy boots on their porch and pronounced them man and wife with a Bible balanced on his saddlebag. The mare watched from the paddock. The fire was already lit when they stepped back inside. That night, Odessa braided her hair with a sprig of dried rosemary and stood barefoot on the pine floor while Vance unbuttoned his shirt with hands that didn't shake. They didn't rush. They didn't speak. But the way he touched her said everything. "I know your weight, your strength, your scars. I will carry none, but I will hold them all." In the spring, they planted squash along the back edge of the garden, just like she'd planned. The hens laid regular, and Odessa built 3 more nesting boxes with scraps from the barn siding. Vance traded pelts for a new scythe and a bolt of blue cotton. She sewed him a new shirt and kissed him quiet under the maple when he tried to protest. The man from Kansas never returned. The land stayed theirs. The quilt Odessa started in winter was finished by May. It lay on their bed stitched with pieces of what had come before, warm with what they'd built. They grew old together, not marked by years but softened by them. She read aloud while he sharpened tools. He cut her apples when her hands grew stiff. The love between them never needed naming. It lived in the way he warmed her boots before she rose, and the way she folded his shirts shoulder to shoulder so they never creased wrong. They never spoke of what might have been. Only what was, and what was home.